Well, we can still get plenty of hurricanes in October. You remember this a couple of years ago. Obviously, you do if you were affected by it. Hurricane Matthew. Parts of the Carolinas there, obviously spots that were just recently affected by Florence as well. But I want to kind of focus on the climatology of generally where do hurricanes tend to form a little bit more than other spots in October. And what you'll normally see, and we're on the downswing now, by the way. September is the peak of hurricane season. You can still have a decent amount in October. You start to get toward the end of the year, and it's a lot less. But in September, you get a lot of storms that will form off the coast of Africa. So you have kind of a hot spot here, Eastern Caribbean, east of there in the Atlantic. Also, the Gulf tends to be pretty active. But what you'll normally notice in October is things kind of shift toward the east in the Gulf a little bit, toward the west in the Caribbean Sea, and you get this little hot spot of possible development areas there right along the East Coast, going up to about areas just south of the Mid-Atlantic. Now, I mentioned this is the hurricane activity map as far as the timeline goes. And we're on the downswing right now. I'd feel a little more comfortable by the time we get to November. By the way, if we get another named storm, the next one would be Michael. Hurricane Michael is finally looking like a hurricane. This thing kind of looked like a mess on satellite over the last day or so, but as expected, it's now a hurricane. And, noticing that the thunderstorms are really wrapping around the center of the storm. This is a sign that the wind shear is starting to decrease a little bit. The wind shear is one of those things that tends to break storms apart. If you looked at the satellite loop yesterday, all the thunderstorms were on the eastern side of it. The wind's coming in out of the west. That westerly shear was really affecting the storm. So it's kind of overcome that. So the shear situation is getting more favorable for it to develop, and it's obviously just sitting over warm water. So that's something these storms always like. There's going to be less shear as it moves up a little bit further into the southeastern Gulf of Mexico. I think it gets a lot stronger. Obviously forecasting it to become a major hurricane, then probably maintain strength, or maybe lose it just a tiny bit before landfall. But this is going to be a big deal, guys.
There's a look at Jim Cantore getting ready in Panama City Beach, Florida, and all of Florida is getting ready. Governor Rick Scott declared a state of emergency for 35 Florida counties as Hurricane Michael nears the Panhandle. At least 500 Florida National Guard troops were activated. Governor Scott also waived tolls to encourage those near the coast to evacuate inland. Mandatory evacuations have been issued for thousands along the Panhandle. ExxonMobil and BP evacuated employees from platforms in the Gulf. And aircrafts at Eglin and Tyndale Air Force bases in the Panhandle are being moved inland. In Tallahassee, residents swarmed grocery stores to fill up on gas and buy generators. At one Costco, members were limited to 2 packs of water per person. Florida State University, Florida A&M University, and Tallahassee Community College closed their campuses. Officials in Tallahassee also said it would be contacting local nursing homes and assisted living facilities to share emergency plans. In Alabama, Governor Kay Ivey issued a state of emergency as well.
Let me show you what that looks like, starting with a 1 to 3 foot water rise above normally dry ground. Now, this might not sound like much, but remember, this is flowing water being pushed by the wind. We know that 1 to 3 foot of storm surge can knock you off your feet, stall out cars, and even carry cars away. It is too late to evacuate when the water rises to this level. But let's go above that. Let's go 3 to 6 feet, for example. Very large objects can be carried in this kind of flowing water. They can act as battering rams and enhance the damage. And let's go even above that. 9 feet of storm surge. This kind of storm surge is not survivable unless you move to the higher floors of whatever structure you happen to be in. So please follow the advice of the local officials and evacuate as ordered when a hurricane moves in.
Hurricane Michael is forcing people from their homes ahead of its arrival. More than 100,000 people have evacuated the Panhandle. Now, the storm is closing in on the Gulf Coast, and the rush is on to finish preparations before Michael makes landfall on Wednesday. Hurricane Michael claimed at least 13 lives in El Salvador, Honduras, and Nicaragua. Parts of Florida, Georgia, and Alabama are in a state of emergency ahead of the storm's arrival. Now, Michael could certainly dump inches of rain on Florida, but also on the Carolinas, Georgia, and Virginia. Many of these same areas are just beginning to fully recover from Hurricane Florence.
Things just got real, guys. As expected, Hurricane Michael is now a major hurricane, Category 3 status. We haven't had a storm like this hitting the Florida Panhandle since 1995, Hurricane Opal. It killed 63 people. These are extremely dangerous storms, and they don't happen very often. I really want to make sure if you live in these evacuation zones that you're taking things seriously. This is going to hit the Florida Panhandle tomorrow, okay? There's not much time, and I want to invite you, especially if you live in the Florida Panhandle, just pop into the Weather Channel app. We have a ton of very short, digestible videos covering all aspects of this thing. Be safe.
We're not holding back on anything with you. We want you to know everything about Hurricane Michael, and we're going to go down a list here pretty quickly so that you can get the gist of everything that's going on. First of all, we'll start with the tropical storm force winds. This is arriving well before the, quote, landfall. And then, of course, we pick up to hurricane force on Wednesday. The dangerous storm surge, which we'll highlight here a bit more in just a second. The life-threatening flash flooding that extends well beyond Florida on up through the Carolinas and Virginia. And then, of course, the tornado risk, which is primarily going to be on the right side of Michael's track, but not necessarily limited to just there. Here's a look at the tracking wind gust. We'll take you into Wednesday. Again, that is the arrival of the hurricane force winds. And there we go into Wednesday night. Still really intense across Florida as well as South Georgia. And then we'll stop the clock as we go into Thursday around 11 p.m. Look at Wilmington, look at Charlotte, look at Asheville, look at Atlanta. Look at the strength of those winds still late on Thursday. The storm surge forecast is going to be pretty severe in the Panhandle region, east of the eye in particular. That's where we could see induced water levels rise anywhere between 16 to 20 feet. Erosion expected for 75% of Florida's Gulf Coast beaches. The rainfall outlook puts a lot of locations to receive more than a foot of rain, and we still are very concerned about the possible tornadoes on the right side of Hurricane Michael's track. A lot of people are wondering, how long are the lights going to be out? Yep, we're anticipating several people spending days in the dark due to Hurricane Michael. Now, there are going to be some differences between what we just saw happening with Florence once that entered over into the Carolinas. This is going to be a much more quick-moving storm, which means the crews are going to be able to get in sooner to do their jobs because the winds are going to die off a lot sooner. Still, with that being said, we're talking about thousands of people that are going to have outages. Very important that you do not operate a gas-powered generator or charcoal grill near your home. Carbon monoxide deaths are a very real danger. That indeed is a silent killer. And don't forget, cell service is going to be going down in many areas for extended periods of time.
Have a look at this. A couple of spots in Florida that are already seeing storm surge issues at some of the high tides, and that's just on the west coast of Florida. That's not even the Florida Panhandle, where it's going to be way, way worse than that. By the way, Hurricane Michael is now a major hurricane, Category 3. And again, where you're seeing some of that video from, down in the Tampa area, the wind already starting to come in onshore there. But it's going to be way, way worse close to the center of it, especially on the east side, wherever this ends up making landfall, which is probably going to be not too far from Panama City. So the Big Bend area, areas on the exact east side of that eye wall, we could be looking at storm surge, in the order of 9 to 13 feet, which is absolutely devastating, but not too atypical for a Category 3 storm. The wind is going to be a huge, huge issue with this particular hurricane. I know this is not going to be like Florence. If you were watching the coverage of that a couple of weeks ago, that was a big rain and flooding storm. This is going to be a wind damage, long-lasting power outages, big-time storm surge storm, and then, obviously, we will have at least some flooding issues, but it's moving fast enough. East side of the storm, we got to watch out for some severe weather. Tornadoes definitely possible too. Sure, the waves are already starting to get big with the approach of Hurricane Michael. And when you look at the ocean right there, Keep in mind that when the storm surge starts happening, parts of the coast are going to become that, all right? You're going to literally be the ocean. There are going to be huge waves on top of that. I mean, the ocean's going to rise, you know, in some spots 6 to 12 feet, maybe even more than that. So storm surge is super deadly, and I want to just kind of go over what things are going to be like. You can see all these storm surge warnings that we have, especially for the central and eastern part of the Florida Panhandle, down through the Big Bend, and for parts of the west coast of Florida. So keep in mind with storm surge, this is when the wind direction basically blows the ocean water up onto land. It's different than flash flooding. It's especially dangerous and especially deadly because, like I said, parts of the coast just become part of the ocean. The storm surge tends to be the worst, pretty close to the center of the storm where the strongest wind is, and basically very close to where the center of the storm makes landfall. It can be more persistent farther from the center, which can lead to long-lasting storm surge, but basically anywhere on this map where you see those little wind barbs pushing from the water onto land, you're going to have bad storm surge issues. And this stuff is super, super dangerous, guys. This is what we evacuate for. It's the deadliest part of a tropical system. Look at this. Some of these forecasts in the Big Bend, 9 to 13 feet, so it's a pretty big deal. Well, we knew it was going to happen. Hurricane Michael is now a major hurricane. It's a Category 3 storm. I mean, people are making preparations and taking it seriously, and I'm really glad to see that because Category 3 storms making landfall are serious business. It's no joke. And the last storm that hit the Florida Panhandle, that was like this, Hurricane Opal, back in 1995. So if you remember that one, it was bad. It killed over 60 people. Here's a storm right now. You notice the thunderstorm is very strong around the center. It's looking very healthy. Still kind of in the strengthening phase. It'll probably hold Category 3 status all the way through landfall. So when is landfall? Well, that's one of the more dangerous parts of the storm is the fact that it's accelerating. It's starting to move faster, and we're thinking this is going to make landfall probably a little bit after lunchtime on Wednesday, but you already have hurricane force gusts before that. The wind is going to be one of the worst parts of the storm, obviously, Category 3 storm. So that's going to mean long-lasting power outages, and the storm surge, especially on the east side of it, is going to be bad. By the way, the worst impacts are not just going to be along the coast. This is going to have some pretty bad impacts pretty far inland into parts of Georgia, the Carolinas. I think we'll have power outages. Look at this. They've upped the storm surge forecast a little bit. Could be up to 13 feet in parts of the Big Bend. That's really, really dangerous stuff. Yeah, we're probably going to have some flash flooding issues with this storm, but it's not a super slow mover like Florence was, so that's a good thing. It's moving fast, some flash flooding, but I think the surge and the wind is going to be the biggest problems.